Hey there, this is John from Heroes and Legends, and welcome to part 2 of our 6-part Eternal Masters full set review. So yesterday we looked at all of the white cards in the set and some of the multicolor cards. Today we're going to look at all of the blue cards as well as the Dimir cards, the Izzet cards, and we have one lone teamer card to take a look at as well. So if you saw yesterday's installment, you'll know this isn't a normal set review. These are all reprints, and these are reprints of some of the most powerful cards ever in the history of Magic. So it's not a question of are these cards good, bad, playable, or not playable. It's really about when and where you want to play them. Now we're going to focus a little more on limited play and really talk about the different archetypes and where these cards are going to fit into the draft and sealed archetypes. So let's start off by talking about the blue archetypes in general. If you listened to yesterday's episode, you know this set is very deep as far as limited. You can really go in any direction. Any color combination you choose is going to be a viable draft archetype. You don't usually see that. Usually if you choose one color in a draft and you get heavy into that color, you basically have maybe 2 or 3 options as far as archetypes go. This time around, you have any other color available to you. So for example, if you start off in blue and you decide you want to go white, you can go into the blue-white Flyers deck. If you go blue-red, you have kind of a flashback / spell burn style deck. If you go blue-green, you have a threshold ramp deck that uses Cascade to get card advantage. And if you go blue-black, you go into the reanimation strategy. So having said that, let's jump into the cards. We'll explore each one and talk about which archetype they best fit into. First, we have Arcanus the Omnipotent. Now, if you can cast Arcanus, he's going to be good for you in any archetype. Now, granted, probably a little better in the Izzet deck. The Izzet deck's the one that's going to want the card advantage. They're going to want to cycle through their deck quickly so they can get their control cards like their counter spells and get their burn cards like their Chain Lightning, so on and so forth. However, card advantage is still card advantage. It doesn't really matter. And what's nice about Arcanus is even though, yes, he is 3 blue, which is going to be hard to cast or hard to hard cast, he's pretty good in a reanimation strategy as a reanimation target sometimes. Now, if you're not playing reanimation and you're not really confident that you're going to be able to cast this regularly, for example, maybe you've gone deep, you're into 3 colors, you're splashing a couple colors, well, then don't get too greedy. There's a lot of amazing cards in this set. If you're afraid you're not going to be able to cast Arcanus, then you may want to leave him out. But if you think you can cast this card or you can use it as reanimation, yes, definitely highly playable. Brainstorm, so maybe one of the most powerful cards in the history of Legacy, and very skill intensive. The more you play with Brainstorm, the more you learn and the more you're able to execute it well. So having said that, where does this fit? Really, this is good in any deck. What's nice about Brainstorm is Duress is in this set. This is awesome against Duress effects, so if your opponent plays a Duress, you can respond with Brainstorm and hide the card that you don't want them to take on top of your library. That's always a huge play. Now, this is probably designed for the Izzet style build. Again, card selection is a big deal in that deck. However, like I said, you'll be happy to play some Brainstorms in any of the archetypes. Next, we have Cephalid Sage. And it looks a little weak on paper. Paying 4 for 2/3 isn't super great. However, it does a couple things. If you're in reanimation and you already have Threshold, it's going to allow you to dump some more cards in your graveyard. If you're in the Simic deck, still drawing cards and discarding 2 cards, even if you already have Threshold, still very good. Simic deck may be the deck that's going to be the easiest to get Threshold in. However, there's a lot of good blue mills, so you could probably pull this off in other decks as well. So basically, if you feel like you're able to have Threshold, this is a fine card to run. If you don't think you're going to have it a high percentage of the time, then you probably want to leave this in the sideboard. Control Magic, just one of the most powerful cards probably in the set for limited. Just the fact that for 4 mana you can completely change the board state by taking one of your opponent's creatures and turning it against them on a permanent basis is amazing. So I'm not even going to try to say this is better in any of the archetypes. This card is just one of the most powerful cards that you can pick up in a draft. So if you get this, then yeah, you're going to play it and be very, very happy. Counterspell. So Counterspell, incredibly strong. You're only paying 2 to counter anything your opponent's trying to do. Even the threat of having 2 blue mana untapped is going to make your opponent think twice and probably slow down the game. And slowing down the game is what a lot of the blue style decks want to do. Reanimation doesn't mind a little bit of a slower game to get some more stuff in their graveyard. The Threshold deck in Simic doesn't mind slowing down the game, and the Izzet deck certainly doesn't mind slowing down the game so they can draw cards and get to their burn spells. So this card is going to be very good for you in pretty much all the archetypes. Even the flyers, it's nice to have some counter magic to support what you're trying to do. Daze. So Daze is another really powerful counterspell. What's funny about Daze, though, is if your opponent is smart enough to play around it, then it's not very good for you. But if they don't, it can be backbreaking. So the thing is, it's at uncommon. So a lot of opponents that are familiar with the set, if they see you're playing blue, are going to at least be aware Daze exists. They may take some risks until they actually see it come out. But once they see it once, they're probably not going to fall for it again for the most part. So Daze is a card that sometimes you just main deck, and then after you use it once, sideboard it out for the second or third game. And that's fine because your opponent now is going to be in their head that you may have Daze, and it's going to slow them down. It's going to do its job whether it's in your deck or not at that point. Next we have Deep Analysis, and this is one of the most efficient card drawing spells that you find in cubes. Obviously this will be great in limited in this set. It's a very affordable way to draw 4 cards over the course of a turn or two. That can be huge and can really swing a game. Now what's nice though is it has flashback, so if you are in a situation where you're milling yourself in maybe the Threshold deck, something like that, this is still a card that you can still get some value out of later down the line, which is awesome. Also good in the Izzet deck, which is also trying to use flashback to get more efficiency out of the cards they're drawing and out of their spells. But come on, this is Deep Analysis. This is going to be good for you in any of the archetypes. Diminishing Returns. Now this one's kind of funny because this is a little counterintuitive to what some of the decks want to do. Wiping out your graveyard is not where Reanimation wants to be and not where the Simic Threshold deck wants to be. So it's probably more where the Izzet deck wants to be. You're able to recycle the cards you've used and at the same time draw a new hand of hopefully some counter magic to protect yourself, some burn spells, maybe some cheap beaters to get in there for the damage. So this is really designed almost specifically for that archetype. It's going to be okay maybe in the Flyers archetype to restock your hand. However, it's more of a really late game play because you don't want to play Diminishing Returns with like 4 mana and then just pass the turn. It starts to give your opponent more of an advantage than it gives you, so that can be an issue. Dream Twist. So a couple things about this card. First off, I'm not going to say it's completely out of the question to mill your opponent, especially if they're milling themselves already. So you're playing limited 40 card deck, they're playing Reanimation or Threshold, they're milling themselves, you happen to be on a mill strategy too, and they get ahead of you. Maybe you switch the tables a little bit and you start milling them. However, keep in mind that can be a little risky too because you could potentially hit something that they're going to be able to utilize. Now, this card is really more for milling yourself. It's going to help you hit Threshold. It's going to help you get flashback spells into your graveyard to be able to get more efficiency in your Izzet deck. It's going to help you hit that reanimation target and get it into the graveyard. So Dream Twist, again, has a lot of purposes and a few different archetypes. Fact or Fiction, another one of the most powerful card draw spells ever printed. Your opponent does get to make the piles, however you get to choose the piles, and a lot of times, especially if graveyard matters because the cards you don't choose go to the graveyard, guess what? This puts your opponent sometimes in an impossible situation. So again, there's certain reanimation spells you like to get in your graveyard. Getting Threshold is definitely a thing in the green-blue deck. So Fact or Fiction becomes that much better in those two decks, but again, this is another one of those cards that is going to be good no matter what. It's going to give you more card advantage in your Izzet deck, which is also going to hopefully get some flashback stuff in your graveyard. But hey, the Flyers deck doesn't mind drawing cards either, so it's good all around. Force of Will. Now, this is a mythic, so you're not going to see it around that much, but wow, talk about a card that can really shape a format, shape a draft environment. Just the fact that this card is looming out there is always going to make you second guess when your opponent's playing blue, that they could have a counterspell no matter what the situation is. So it's always kind of going to be on your mind. You can't really play around it though, considering it's a mythic. If you're lucky enough to get one of these, again, you're probably going to surprise your opponent at some point and maybe even get a victory out of it. This card's extremely powerful. Again, it doesn't matter what archetype you're playing. Now, blue, red, yeah, it might be a little better because of that deck's trying to be a little more controlling than maybe some of the others, but yeah, let's face it, this is going to be playable anywhere. Future Sight. Now, Future Sight, much like Arcanus, is a triple blue spell, so it's not a given that every deck's going to be able to easily cast this, but if you're confident that you're going to be able to cast this card, this can be good for you any of the decks. Again, this feels like it was designed to go in the red-blue deck just because card advantage is probably most important to that deck. However, it's still a great card to garner advantage, especially if a game goes long. Just being able to play the extra card off the top of your library or play a land off the top of your library and flip another card. This can get kind of out of hand fast. If your opponent doesn't find an answer for it, you're probably going to run over them with card advantage. Gaseous Form. Now, blue doesn't have a lot of removal spells. You're going to see as we go through here, there's some quasi-removal type spells, but Gaseous Form is a little bit awkward. If you ever try to play this on like your opponent's creature, then yeah, it stops them from attacking, but it also kind of gives them this wall now that you're going to have to figure out some other way to get around. This works a little better if you put it on one of your creatures. This is probably best in the Flyers deck because you can put this on a small flyer and just basically create a barrier against one of your opponent's really large kind of stompy creatures. So having said that, it's not always going to make your cut. It's probably going to sit in your sideboard. You're going to want to see what your opponent's playing first. But if they're playing some big creatures and they're getting ahead of you and maybe you're in the Flyer style deck, maybe then you put this card in. It's not going to be the best form of quote-unquote removal that you can find, but if it's the only thing you got, you may have to play it. Giant Tortoise. So let's talk about slowing down the game with a Giant Tortoise. It costs 2. You're basically getting a 1/4. This is all about just slowing the game down so blue can develop its game plan. And blue likes to do that. This is probably less good in the Flyers deck, but not unplayable. The other decks might actually like this card. The Simic deck, it might take a little time before you start getting Threshold and hitting some of your Cascade cards, so this is okay to slow things down. The Reanimation deck wants to get to the reanimation targets, so again, it's not a bad idea to slow things down. The Izzet deck is trying to draw cards, get to their burn spells, get to their little aggressive red creatures and such. So again, not a bad idea to slow the game down. So this card looks pretty innocuous, but it definitely has its role. Glacial Wall. Well, speaking of slowing the game down, again, this is another way to do that. It's going to work just the way Giant Tortoise worked, so not a whole lot more for me to say about it. Honden of Seeing Winds. So I talked a little bit yesterday about these Hondens. There's one in each color, and they're all at the uncommon slot. So if you were really aggressive and wanted to try to draft the Honden deck, you might be able to do a nice little 5-color good stuff deck and have something formidable on your hands. Now, having said that, aside from that strategy, this is still good on its own because unlike some of the other Hondens that the effect isn't as exciting, I mean, this one's letting you draw an extra card each turn. That's actually kind of huge. So even if you just have one of these in your deck and you play it and it just becomes a extra card draw every single turn with no drawback to it, yeah, that's actually kind of amazing. So again, might be best in the Izzet deck, but yeah, this is going to be fine for you in any deck. It's the one Honden that you don't really have to worry about maybe having the others for this to be playable. Hydroblast, a fantastic sideboard card. Now, granted, if your opponent's not playing red, it's not going to do anything, but if they're playing red, this is backbreaking. It counters red spells, destroys red permanents, and it only costs 1 blue mana at instant speed. Yes, side that in, you're going to be very happy you did. Inkwell Leviathan. Now, this is a card you're not trying to hardcast. This is something you want to either reanimate or play in the Simic deck to try to ramp into. If you can ramp into this or reanimate it, is a great card. Do keep in mind, though, it has Shroud. That's not hexproof, so you can't enchant your own creature. That can get awkward sometimes. Really easy to forget that, so keep that in mind. Jace the Mind Sculptor. Yeah, play it. Let's go on to the next card. So yeah, Jace. Yeah, if you open a Jace, come on, right? You're gonna be playing this. You're gonna be drafting it. You're gonna be playing it in your sealed pool. It's gonna be good no matter what deck you have. Now he is 2 blue, so you do want to make sure you'll be able to cast Jace. But yes, this card will shine maybe a little more in the red-blue deck because card advantage and the brainstorm ability is going to be that much better in that deck. However, this is going to be amazing in any deck that you can shoehorn Jace into. Yes, he brainstorms for free, he fate seals, he bounces creatures, just does anything you need him to do. Not more I can say about this. I think everybody knows just how broken this card can be. Jetting Glasskite, a fantastic card for the blue-white Flyers deck. 4/4 flyer, cost 6, a little pricey, but what you're getting in return is pretty awesome. Just the fact that it's going to protect your other Flyers is amazing. So I really like this card. It's at uncommon, so you should be able to pick one up for the most part. Mana War, another great tempo play. Again, it doesn't really matter what deck you put this in. Blue wants to usually slow down the game. Maybe this isn't quite as good in the Flyers deck as some of the other decks, but it's still going to be good in the Flyers deck, let's face it. Just the fact that you're getting a 2/2 and bouncing your opponent's best creature for 3, it's just huge. It can be a big play, lets you attack in for some major damage sometimes. Memory Lapse. Now, Memory Lapse at first kind of feels like, oh, okay, well, it's a little bit of a tempo play, but this can be a very powerful card, especially used in conjunction with other cards and especially timed correctly. If you've ever played this in, say, other cubes or even in Legacy in the past, you kind of know how good this card can be. Yes, it does feel like a tempo play at times, but if your opponent is missing land drops and they play maybe just some small creature, you memory lapse that, goes on top of their library, now they're back another turn trying to hit their land. It can really be backbreaking. Also too is the old trick of you play this with, say, like a Dream Twist, and you counter something big and then you mill it out of the library into the graveyard. So there's a lot you can do with this card. It's at common. There'll be a fair amount of these going around. Great control card for blue. Merfolk Looter. Now, back in the old days, we didn't know how good looters were, so they only cost 2. Nowadays, they cost like 4 or something. But here's a looter for 2. Looters are going to be great, again, in any of the decks you build, especially late game when you're trying to draw heat and you're trying to avoid lands. This is a great way to get past some lands and draw into your threats. Or early game when you're trying to hit lands, you can dump some of the large things out into the graveyard. Now, aside from that, we also know graveyard matters. Yeah, this is going to be awesome in basically all the archetypes. Mystical Tutor, again, one of the most powerful cards probably ever printed. If you're in blue, you're going to have instants and sorceries, so yeah, you're going to play this. You're going to tutor for what you need when you need it. You'll be very happy you did. If you happen to be in, say, Is It, then yeah, that opens up a whole other world too of more offensive spells like burn spells and such, as well as maybe your counter magic that you have in blue. This is going to be awesome for you. It doesn't matter what deck you're playing. Una's Grace. So drawing cards and having the retraceability is actually very good, and the fact that you can pay 3 to draw 1 card at instant speed, that's okay, but then the fact that later on you can keep retracing this ability, especially in the late game if you're drawing extra lands, that's really good. This maybe shines a little more in the blue-green deck because this could also help you get Threshold by finding a way to discard some of your lands for value, but at the same time it could be good in the other decks as well. Next we have Peregrine Drake. This is fantastic for the Flyers deck. So at first glance you look at this, paying 5 for a 2/3, is that good? Well, the ability really puts it over the top. The fact that I'm paying 5 but then I can untap up to 5 lands, I play this, I get a 2/3 flyer, and then I'm able to untap and keep my counter magic up. That's pretty awesome. Or sometimes if I want to get super aggressive, I play this and then I get to play another flyer. This is going to be awesome for that deck for sure. Now, as far as untapping the lands goes, there's nothing really in this set that's going to be really abusive of untapping lands as much as you find in, say, some cubes and stuff like that, where if you have like Tolarian Academy, for example, that can get kind of crazy to untap that and just generate tons of mana. But in this set, this is still going to be very good for you in draft and sealed. Phantom Monster. Don't underestimate Phantom Monster. And it's a very vanilla flyer, but a 3/3 flyer for 4 is actually quite good. So I used to play this all the time. I used to play this with Sarah Angels and just kind of just fly over and just crush my opponent. And I'd hold some counter magic back to deal with some of the crazy threats you used to have to deal with in the old days of Magic. And it was a very good deck. So I'm looking forward to playing Phantom Monster. I think it's going to be excellent in that blue-white Flyers deck. Phyrexian Ingester. So here's something unusual. This is like actual removal for blue. You don't see this quite often. And you even get a creature, maybe even a sizable creature out of it. It's very interesting. Now, it costs 7 to cast. That's the downside. But I think this is going to be really good in a couple of the archetypes. This could be great in the Simic deck because you do have a lot of ramp available to you. So if you can ramp into this, it can be quite good. And secondly, it's a decent reanimation target too. That's going to let you reanimate, get yourself a maybe sizable creature, and also deal with a threat at the same time. Prodigal Sorcerer. Again, this is more of a controlling card. Probably kind of wants to be in the Izzet deck, but again, it's another card that's good, especially good in multiples. So if you're playing even some of the other archetypes, having some Prodigal Sorcerers might not be a bad thing for you. If you draft and you are able to get maybe, I don't know, 3 or 4 of these, and you get a few out at the same time, it can be backbreaking. Your opponent really gets stuck in a position where they can't play some of their lower toughness creatures. They just have to kind of hang on to them. In the meantime, you're just pinging them for more damage all the time. It can really kind of add up and start to take the game away from your opponent quickly. Quiet Speculation. This is another one of those cards that kind of looks innocuous, but in reality can be very, very strong. If you have flashback targets in your deck, guess what? You're basically tutoring for 3 cards. That's kind of awesome, and it only costs 2. So keep that in mind. If you have flashback targets, this is a good play. Your Izzet deck should have plenty of them, but even if you're not in Izzet, there's some other good flashback targets out there. So yeah, if you got the targets, go for it. Screeching Scab. So another way to mill yourself. Going to be good for you in reanimation. Going to be good to get flashback stuff in your graveyard. And Izzet going to be good in Simic to help you hit threshold. Serendib Ifrit. Another great flyer for the blue-white flyer deck. This is another card that, even though, yes, it has a little bit of a drawback, it's cheap. I pay 3, I get a 3/4 flyer, and I can just start beating in. And this card can be quite good. I've played it in some cubes where it's awesome. I've played it in other cubes that it gets a little bit overshadowed by all the removal and just different ways to deal with it. But the fact that you can get this down on turn 3 makes it pretty amazing. Shoreline Ranger. So it's a flyer. Paying 6 for a 3/4 flyer, probably not where you really want to be though. This kind of shines more so when you're trying to mana fix. So maybe you're splashing blue as a color, and this is an opportunity to either late game give yourself a nice creature, or early game island cycle. That's really why you're playing this. It's good if you're going 5-color good stuff, or even 4 colors, stuff like that. Silent Departure. So it has flashbacks, so it's going to work well with all the milling shenanigans that are out there. It's very cheap to play the first time around, a little more expensive for the flashback. However, this is a good tempo play, and it can be used in many of the archetypes, obviously. Spirit Noble, another good blue-white flyers card. In itself, it's a flyer. It makes your flyers have more toughness, and if you want to get aggressive, you can tap it for some more value in combat. Stupefying Touch. This one's more of a sideboard card. Now, it's nice because it's cheap and it cantrips, but at the same time, you have to think, well, is my opponent definitely going to have a creature activation that I'm worried about? If they're playing like an aggressive deck, like the Flyers deck, they might not really have anything you need to use this on. So, yeah, keep it in the sideboard. Wait till you know you have targets for it, and then you can bring it in. Tidal Wave. So this is blue removal for the most part. I mean, unfortunately, it's very conditional. I can't deal with flyers, but if your opponent's attacking it, especially in the early game with some aggressive creatures or smaller creatures, you can surprise them with this and get a little bit of value. Not a whole lot of value, but it's really one of the better things you can do when it comes to removal for blue. So if you weren't able to counterspell it, and it gets on the board, then Tidal Wave might be able to deal with it. It's not a card that's always going to be awesome for you by any means, but there's going to be certain decks that's going to be better. So sometimes it might start out as a sideboard card, but there'll definitely be times you'll want to side this in. Warden of Evos Isle, another amazing card for the white-blue flyers. And not much I can say about it. I mean, obviously it's a flyer. It makes your flyers cheaper. That's awesome. And keep in mind, though, it's also a common, so you could draft a number of these and just have a really aggressive flyer deck. Wonder. Wonder has a couple purposes. First off, yes, it's great in the flyer deck. It is a flyer. It can give other creatures that maybe don't have flying, especially in sealed. That might be good. It's also very good in your threshold deck. You're able to dump a lot of cards into the graveyard. You're trying to hit threshold. You hit threshold. You get this in there. Your creatures also have flying. That can get pretty crazy pretty quick. We're also going to see another card that's very similar to this in green that it can also work well with. So this is very good in a few archetypes. Works good in reanimation too. Again, another archetype where you're dumping a lot of stuff into your graveyard. You hit that big reanimation target. Now it might even have flying too. All right, let's move on to Dimir. And we're going to start off with Baleful Strix. So first time that you can ever get Baleful Strix in foil, so that's kind of exciting. But this is a card that's all about slowing down the game, and blue likes to slow down the game. So even if you're not in Dimir exclusively, you could splash black into other blue decks and just still get a lot of value out of this card. It cantrips for starters, and just the fact that it's a flying death touch is really going to kind of halt the game a little bit and slow it down. Your opponent's going to have to get around this card. Extract from Darkness. Well, one of the better reanimation spells out there. Costs 5. You're basically going to be able to reanimate something. The only downside is your opponent may also be on a strategy where getting stuff in their graveyard is good for them, so it could help fuel your opponent a little bit, so you want to be a little careful. But for the most part, you're only playing this if you have a real good target already. It's not like you're gambling for the most part. Now we move into Izzet with Call the Skybreaker. So this is an interesting card. At first glance, you think, well, it's a flyer. Maybe it fit in the Flyers deck. It could. It's a little pricey, though, I think. Second, well, it's in Izzet colors, so yeah, maybe this is just a way for my Izzet deck to get a big creature on the board, or maybe even a couple of them. And I do think that's very viable, especially if you do make it to the late game. You've used control magic to slow things down. This could be a very good win condition in some of the Izzet builds. But I think where this really is going to shine is actually the Simic deck. And the reason I say that is because there's a lot of ramp available in green. Ramping into something like this could be quite good. And then the fact that you can continue to retrace to help you hit threshold and to really just use that extra mana to pour into something that's a viable threat could be really good in that deck. So don't let the Izzet colors fool you. You can cast this for 2 blue and 5 of any color because it is a hybrid card. Watch for it in that deck. I think it's going to really shine there. Dak Fade In. So Dak's another card. I mean, much like Jace, if you get Dak, you're just going to play him. It doesn't matter what archetype you're in. You can even splash a color, hopefully, to get him into some decks if you're already playing red or blue. But regardless, does a lot of stuff the blue decks want to do. It's going to help you populate your graveyard, which is good for really 3 of the archetypes out there, right? This is still a good card, though, because in addition to populating your graveyard, it's giving you card selection, so it's going to work really in any deck. And there's some good artifacts out there, so if your opponent's playing some artifacts, then they probably will be playing something. Dak is going to either be able to come down and steal it, or keep that card in your opponent's hand. They won't be able to play it because Dak's on the board. Very, very good card. If you've ever played with this back in Conspiracy, you know how strong he can be. We Dragonauts. Now, there's not really like a storm thing going on. However, the Izzet deck is playing a lot of spells, so this kind of works almost like a little bit of a quasi-prowess. A little more of a offensive prowess, I guess. So it's very good in those decks. This can be probably good for you in the flyer deck as well if you're just splashing for some red. But yeah, it's really going to shine, obviously, if you're playing a lot of spells. And our last card of the day, which is our lone teamer card, is Maelstrom Wanderer. So again, you're probably not on the plan to hardcast something like this. However, if you're in the Simic deck and you can splash some red, which should be pretty easy to do, you might be able to ramp into this. It's an awesome reanimation target. I do like it in the Simic deck, though, because that plays with Cascade as well, and you might be able to double Cascade into something good, or even Cascade into another Cascade, and so on and so forth. So this card really shines probably in that deck, but it's still very good in the reanimation deck, too. It has haste, it comes in, it can attack right away, and needless to say, this is one of the mythics, and could be a win condition for you in at least a couple of the decks. All right, well, those are all the blue cards, as well as a handful of the multicolor cards. So we'll be back tomorrow. We're going to look at all the black cards, and again, some of the multicolor to stay ahead there. And then we'll be back the following day with red, then green, and then finally all the colorless cards. So until then, hey, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day.
Hey, thanks as always for watching. This video, like all my videos, was made possible by the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Even a donation of $1 helps me to keep growing this community and creating better quality videos for all of you. Check out our Patreon page for exclusive giveaways and future goals for the channel. If you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the MTG news, spoilers, set reviews, product openings, or finance videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a good day.